Okay, examiner, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check our 7 lights to make sure that they're all working. I'm going to check my low beam lights to make sure they're working. Yeah, the low beam lights are working on both sides. Now I'm going to check the running lights. The running lights right here, up there. Those on the mirrors, they're working. They're working over here. Also here. And back here too. Go to the right side. It's working here. Up there. Over here. Here. Also back here. Okay, so now I'm going to do the high beam lights.
High beam lights. High beam lights.
High beam lights are working. Now I'm going to do the left turn signal light. It's working right here. And also back here. So now I'm going to do the right side, right turn signal light. Right here. Also working back here. So now I'm going to do the hazard lights. Hazards are working right there. Hazards are working back here. So this is where I would ask the examiner, say, I'm going to cancel the hazard lights, press the brake pedal. Can you give me the thumbs up if my brake lights are working? So you ask for help on that. We're not going to do that right now, but that's the lights. So keep it running. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the condition of them at the front of the truck here. So the front of the vehicle, the lights and reflectors, the lights up on top and the lights and reflectors on the mirrors, the lights and reflector here, the lights and reflector right here, they're all clean, clear, not cracked. None are loose, none are missing. They're all securely mounted in the proper color amber. The headlights too are clean, clear, not cracked at all. They're not loose at all. There's no broken or missing bulbs at all. They're securely mounted. Mirrors. The mirror here is not bent, broken, or cracked. There's no missing nuts or bolts at all. The housing here is not damaged or cracked at all. Also, the lenses here are clean, clear, not cracked, not loose or missing, securely mounted. So now I'm going to do the engine compartment. Oil level. I'm going to check the oil. You come over here, come closer. I'm going to check the oil level here at the yellow dipstick while the engine's off. I'm going to remove this dipstick, wipe it clean, reinsert it, pull it back out. It should be above the add line. If it's below the add line, up here I'll add oil. The cap there is not loose or missing. It's not cracked or leaking. The reservoir here is not cracked or leaking. There's no missing nuts or bolts. Also, there's no loose or missing hose clamp. There's no abrasive washer cuts. It's not cracked or leaking. All of this here is securely mounted. Coolant level. I'm going to check the coolant level while the engine's off. It should be above this add line and below this full line. If it's below this add line, I'm going to add coolant up here. This cap here is not loose. It's not cracked or leaking at all. The reservoir is not cracked or leaking. There's no missing nuts or bolts at all. There's no loose or missing hose clamp. There's no abrasions, bulges, or cuts in this hose. It's not cracked or leaking. This electrical line is securely connected. There's no cut or exposed wires or any sign of corrosion. Everything here is securely mounted. Power steering fluid. I'm going to check the power steering fluid right here while the engine's running. It should be above this midline and below this max line. If it's below this midline, up here I'm going to add power steering fluid. The cap's not loose or missing, cracked or leaking. The reservoir's not cracked or leaking. There's no missing nuts or bolts at all. There's no loose or missing hose clamp at all. The hoses here, there's no abrasion, bodge cuts, it's not cracked or leaking. All of this here is securely mounted. So now I'm going to do the water pump. The water pump is inside here. It's that pulley with the little knob that goes into the fan right there. It's got 4 bolts on it. That water pump right there, it's not cracked, bent, or dented at all. There's no missing bolts at all. It's not leaking at all. It's belt driven. The belt's not cut, torn, or frayed. It's also the proper tension. When I push by hand, there's no more than 3/4 inch of play. My water pump there is securely mounted. Now let's go do the alternator that's on the passenger side here. This is my alternator right here. My alternator here is not cracked, dented, or bent at all. Also, the electrical lines are securely connected. There's no cut or exposed wires or any sonic corrosion. My alternator here is belt driven. The belt's not cut, torn, or frayed, and it's the proper tension. When I push by hand, there's no more than 3/4 inch of play. Also, there's no missing nuts or bolts or shiny exposed threads. My alternator here is securely mounted. Leaks and hoses. I'm gonna smell up here for any burnt plastic or burnt rubber, which might indicate one of these hoses are loose. We don't have any loose or missing hose clamps at all. The hoses, there's no abrasions, bulge cuts, not cracked or leaking at all. The metal lines going into the radiator are not bent, broken, or cracked or leaking at all. There's nothing leaking or dripping on the top of the motor, on the front of the motor, or here by the radiator. Nothing dripping or puddling on the ground at all. There's nothing dripping or puddling on the ground at all right over here. Up here, I'm gonna listen for any air leaks and look for any liquid leaks, because I have air and liquid over here that lead into the compressor right there. Now I'll talk about the air compressor itself. This is the air compressor right here. My air compressor here is not cracked, bent, or dented at all. These lines right here are not cracked, bent, or dented, or leaking at all. I'm gonna look for any liquid leaks and listen for any air leaks up here. Also, there's no missing nuts or bolts or shiny exposed threads. My air compressor here is belt driven. The belt's not cut, torn, or frayed. When I push by hand, there's no more than 3/4 inch of play. My air compressor here is securely mounted. We don't have a master cylinder, but we have automatic transmission fluid. I'm going to check the automatic transmission fluid here at the red dipstick while the engine's running. I'm going to remove that dipstick, wipe it clean, reinsert it, pull it back out. It should be above the add line. If it's below that add line with a funnel, I'll add it right here. The line there is not cracked, dented, or bent at all. It's not leaking at all. It's securely mounted. So, steering box and hoses. So this is my steering box right here. And these are the hoses up here and up here. The hoses right here, there's no abrasions, bulge cuts, it's not cracked or leaking. They're also securely connected to the steering box up here. It's not bent, broken, or cracked or leaking at all. The steering box itself is not cracked, bent, or dented at all. There's no missing nuts or bolts or shiny exposed threads down here. There's no gap at all. It's also not rusted through anywhere. It's also not leaking anywhere. My steering box and hoses here are securely mounted. So, steering linkage. So this is my steering linkage. This is my steering shaft right here. This is my pitman arm right here. And this is my drag link right here. My steering shaft is straight. It's not cracked, bent, or dented at all. There's no missing nuts or bolts or shiny exposed threads. It's also properly greased right here. When I twist the steering shaft by hand, there's no more than 10 degrees of play. And when I go up on the wheel, there should be no more than 2 inches of play. This is my pitman arm right here. My pitman arm is not cracked, bent, or dented at all. There's no missing nuts or bolts or shiny exposed threads at all. It's also properly greased. The drag link here is not cracked, bent, or dented at all. It's not rusted through anywhere at all here at the drag link or the pitman arm. Also properly greased. There's no missing nuts or bolts or shiny exposed threads. The drag link and pitman arm and steering shaft are all securely mounted. Tires. There's front tires up here. They cannot be recapped. These are virgin tread. The tread depth is at least 4/32 deep, evenly worn all the way around. They're not worn too thin anywhere. There's no flat spots anywhere at all. Also, the sidewalls, there's no abrasions, bulge cuts, not cracked or leaking. I'm going to listen for air leaks. Then I'm going to read the spec on the tire. With the air gauge, I'll check it right here at the valve stem. The valve stem is not loose, not cracked, leaking. The dust cap's in place. These tires up here are securely mounted. Rims. I'm going to inspect the rims both inside and out to make sure there's no sign of repair or legal welds. There cannot be. Also, it's not cracked, bent, or dented at all. It's not warped at all. Also, there's no gap between the tire and the rim. The tire is evenly sealed all the way around. Lug nuts. I'm going to inspect all these lug nuts to make sure none of them are loose or missing. None of them are broken or cracked. There's no shiny exposed threads. There's no metal shavings anywhere at all. Also, there's no gap between the lug nut and the rim or rust trails. All these lug nuts here are securely mounted. hub oil seal. I'm going to inspect the hub oil seal both inside here and outside here. I'm going to look inside this rim right here to make sure there's no sign of any leaking, like spattering or drips anywhere at all. This gasket's in place. It's not worn through, cracked or leaking at all. There's no missing bolts here at all. The housing here is not cracked, bent, or dented at all. I'm going to look inside the sight glass to make sure I see some oil inside here. If I didn't see any oil in here, I'd add oil right here. My hub oil seal is securely mounted. Front suspension, springs and shocks. These are my springs right here. These are my springs, and this is my shock. My springs are all straight. None of them are loose or missing. They're not rusted through at all. They're not cracked, bent, or dented at all. There's no missing nuts or bolts at all. They're also not crisscrossing or scissoring one another at all. My springs right there are securely mounted. My shock is right here. It too is straight. It's not cracked or leaking at all. It's not rusted through at all. It's not cracked, bent, or dented at all. There's no missing nuts or bolts at all. Also, those rubber bushings down there at the bottom and also there on the top, they're in place. They're not worn through or missing at all. My shock is securely mounted. Yeah, okay. U-bolts. These are my U-bolts right here. I have one right here, one right here. The U-bolts right there. There's no gap up here at all. These are not twisted or sagging or loose at all. They're not cracked, bent, or dented at all, or rusted through at all. Down below, there's no missing nuts or bolts at all. No shiny exposed threads at all. My U-bolts there are securely mounted. Front brake. Brake hoses are lines. So this is the brake hose right here, and this is the ABS line right here. Brake hose and ABS line. This brake hose right here is not loose. It's securely connected to the supply line. Also the brake chamber up here. There's no abrasion, bulge, cuts, not cracked or leaking at all. On this ABS line, it's not dangling there loose at all. There's no cut or exposed wires or any sign of corrosion at all. My ABS line and brake hose are securely mounted. Brake chamber. My brake chamber has a front and a back and this clamp right here. This clamp is not loose. It's not twisted or sagging at all. It's not rusted through at all. It's not cracked, bent, or dented at all. There's no gap between the brake chamber ends. The brake chamber itself is not cracked, bent, or dented at all. Also right here, I'd listen for any air leaks. My brake chamber here is securely mounted. Slack adjuster and push rod. This is my slack adjuster right here, and this is the push rod right here. The slack adjuster is straight. It's not loose or sagging at all. It's not bent, broken, or cracked. It's properly greased right here. There's no missing pins or counter keys at all. The push rod right here, I'm going to pull this by hand. There should be no more than 1 inch of plate. It should be even on both sides. The push rod itself is not cracked, bent, or dented at all. The push rod and slack adjuster are securely mounted. So then I'm going to inspect the brake linings inside of here. I want to make sure that I'm going to inspect the outside to make sure there's no sign of repair or legal welds at all. It's not rusted through anywhere at all. It's not cracked, bent, or dented at all. I'm going to inspect the inside through these inspection holes right here. On the inside of the drum, I want to make sure it's dry. There's no oil or grease on the inside of the drum. Also, there's no sign of repair or legal welds at all. Also, there's no warping or discoloration at all. Those brake linings inside there, they're at least 1/4 inch thick. They're not worn, dangerously thin. They're even all the way around. None of it's loose or broken at all. They too are dry, no oil or grease. The linings and brake drum are securely mounted. That's it. Stop.